right.
Okay, are we ready? Are we ready to start?
Yeah, we're live.
Yeah, we are.
We are. Hi, everyone.
Amazing. Hello, everybody. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody in the audience, welcome to the very first joint webinar between Genially and Wakelet. We've been working together for some time now, so I'm really excited to be hosting this on behalf of Wakelet. So Wakelet and Genially, two amazing online tools helping educators create and share engaging content. So we're putting together this series of webinars, and luckily Wakelet gets the first one, which is awesome. And today we're going to be talking all about digital storytelling, how you can use it in the classroom, how you can use it to enhance the learning outcomes of your students, and much, much more. So the way that the webinar is going to work is I'm going to be asking the questions, and then we're going to have a discussion with the incredible, amazing, legendary E-twins, Mario and Alberto, and then we'll be taking some questions from the audience as well. So if you've joined us today, thank you so much. Please make sure to write all of the questions that you have for us in the comments box, and we'll try and answer all of them by the end of the webinar. So, as I said before, my name is Misbah and I lead partnerships at Wakelet. For those of you who may not know what Wakelet is, we're a content curation platform, and we allow educators and anybody really to collect, organize, and share any type of online content that they find from across the web, create these beautiful looking collections that they can then share with whoever they want. I'll pass you on to Brenna now from Genially.
Yep, thanks. So I am Brenna, and I'm here representing Genially. For those of you who don't know Genially, it is the all-in-one online tool for creating interactive and animated content to really engage your audience. And as I mentioned, I'm a trainer, so I work on the training team there. And my role today will be mainly moderating the chat. So please send your questions in the chat, and I will get them ready to ask later.
And of course, like I said before, I don't think one introduction is enough for Mario and Alberto. We have to introduce them again. The legendary E-twins. You've done so much for Wakelet, so much for Genially, amazing icons of the EdTech community. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello everyone. How are you doing today? We are so happy to be here today. So thank you to Wakelet and Genially for the invite to be here today, and thank you to all of you for joining us today in this webinar.
So as you can see, we are twins, of course, and originally from Spain. And like 5 years ago, we went to Utah with a scholarship, and then we got hired. And we are there. We are still there, you know, teaching. We teach Spanish, and then we love technology. We love, you know, just engage our students. So that's why we really love Wakelet and Genially. Those great tools for that.
Amazing. So what we'll do then, I think, to kick us off, we'll just start with the question. So obviously, everyone's here today to hear a little bit about digital storytelling and what it is, and hopefully, you guys. We'll be able to explain a little bit for the audience. And I'm not an educator. I've never taken a class, but I'm lucky enough to be involved in the educator community. So hopefully I can share some stories from our community as well that can help us answer some of the questions and discuss them. So the first question, which is naturally, what is digital storytelling, right? We hear this word a lot. We hear the word, the phrase digital storytelling a lot. It's one of the buzzwords that comes up quite often when we're discussing EdTech. And as a curation platform, Wakelet, and obviously with Genially as well, we get a lot of exposure to this word just because our platforms are, kind of very much in line with what's expected from digital storytelling learning outcomes. So, you guys take us away. What, in your eyes, what is digital storytelling?
So storytelling, actually, if we think about it, it's kind of the oldest way of teaching, right? Like many, many years ago, like teachers didn't have books, they didn't have computers, they didn't have notebooks. So how did they teach? So they taught just telling the stories, and the content was inside of those stories. So it is very important and very engaging for the students because it's like the books, right? We read a book and we want to keep reading, like what is going to happen. So, but if we can include all the content that we need to teach inside those stories, it is very engaging for the students. And like, it's just amazing, how they are waiting for the next thing to happen, right? And then like teaching is very easy.
Yeah, if we add the digital part to the storytelling like picture, what we do is to enhance the story that we already have with different like, kind of like artifacts or different interactive parts. What we do is enhancing that story to reach more students or to engage better the students. So we'll take a look at the summer model. We're not looking for the substitution level. We are doing like enhancing or redefining the story that we are telling using digital tools such as like Wakelet or Genially.
Yeah, I love what you said about how it's like the original learning and original teaching comes from stories, and that's so true because for me, when I look back at I mean, I think you learn throughout the whole of your life, okay? But I think when you're younger, your brain tends to be a lot more receptive to learning. Like you kind of you retain a lot more information, and stories tend to be very memorable. So I remember like when my teachers or my parents or anybody was trying to teach me something, they'd usually use like a story to help kind of give an example of why I should do something or why I shouldn't do something, that type of thing. And you're right, it just makes it a lot more memorable. And injecting that digital element into it is incredible because there's so many different kinds of media that you can use today. You know, there are people that have created stories on just using tweets. Like there's a really spooky, scary story that went viral last year called Dear John. And it was this guy on Twitter, and he told the story just through tweets with some pictures here and there, some videos, and it went viral. It was really, really popular. He's now hosting that on Wakelet. But it made us realize, like, wow, there's so many different ways to tell stories nowadays, using lots of different types of media, which is incredible. Now, how is digital storytelling beneficial in a learning classroom environment, right? Because it's easy to kind of just sit and tell stories to people, but when it comes to actual practical teaching, what have you, in your experience, what's effective? As in, why is it beneficial for the classroom environment?
So I think that the point about the storytelling, it is not just about the content, right? So while we are teaching storytelling, we are developing some skills in our students, skills like creativity, like critical thinking, problem solving skills, those skills that are really, really important. Those skills that now are called future ready skills or the new future ready skills. So yesterday, actually, right, we were taking a look at the new World Economic Forum report that they just published yesterday. And they talk about how important all of these skills are going to be for the students in their future. So the content is important in storytelling. Also, the skills that we develop during this practice, they are really important for our students too.
And with the digital storytelling, it allows us to give to our students different kinds of teaching styles. Like, for example, like not all of our students learn in the same way. Maybe one student wants to watch a video, but the other one would rather to read a story or read a book. You know, so with the digital storytelling allows us to give to our students different ways for them to learn. If they want to, you know, like listen at something, they can do it. If they want to read the story, they can do it. And in that way, you know, like we are doing individualized learning for our students, you know, and the same way that we are teaching them content through a story. So all of those possibilities are what Alberto said about the skills, creativity, and all of that. It just makes it very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think what you said is really important, that different kinds of students have different ways of learning. You know, I remember when I was in school, I used to be a very acoustic listener, right? So I didn't respond very well to visuals. I was more listening. So I would be listening to the teacher. I remember my teacher would always get really angry with me because I'd always be drawing in my notebook. So I'd be drawing pictures of like animals and things, but in my mind, I'm not concentrating on the drawing. That's the way that I would lock into learning, you know? So when the teacher would come and get really angry, I'd try and explain, but I guess I was too young to, you know, tell her every student learns differently, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes sense. You know, a lot of different students learn in a different way. So if a student responds well to a video, then there are video resources out there. If they respond well to storytelling, to text, then there are, you know, they can read books, that type of thing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. how can we incorporate storytelling into the classroom? Now, I say this because at Wakelet, there's so many different ways that people are using the platform, but assignments are really big. So teachers are setting assignments on our platform where they will say, okay, we would like you to use mixed media and create a Wakelet collection that's telling a particular story or a news story or something that happened to you, or even how was your holiday? How was your summer vacation? Something as simple as that. And that's one of the really effective ways of using storytelling in the classroom and incorporating it in the classroom. In your experience, what types of ways do you think you can actually incorporate digital storytelling?
So we can see it from like two perspectives, right? From the educator perspective, how we as a teachers can use storytelling to engage our students and to teach content, and like the other perspective, the other part is like how we give to our students different tools to create their own story, right? So we can use to create our materials or to give that tools to our students to create materials. So as a teacher, I find it like very interesting how engaging it is. If I'm teaching, for example, about science, that we will talk about that later. Like instead of just teaching, for example, the water cycle, and how it works and all that. What about if I create a story about, like, I don't know, like a piece of wood, just travels around the river, and then evaporation goes up and all of that. Students are gonna engage. They want to know what is going to happen. And if we could include all of the contents, all of the science content inside of that story, it's great. And what we are finding, it's that every time it's harder, to engage our students. Like when we visit some classes or in our own classes, we are finding out that it is so hard to engage students nowadays because they are so used to play video games.
And of course. So engaging. So they want the same kind of engagement, and sometimes it's really hard for the teacher to offer that same offering that the video games or other things are doing. So by doing digital storytelling, we are kind of matching the level of engagement that these students need in their life. And I think that also, like following what you were saying, so I remember a couple of years ago, I had a pretty like hard student, and she was really into Star Wars. She loved Star Wars. I mean, who doesn't, right? So she was really into Star Wars. So what I did, following storytelling path, so I created like different stories based on the Star Wars universe for her to learn some content, and she just like loved that. I think it was a great way for her to learn the content in a different way. So it can be really good for challenging students to use storytelling, find out what their likes, what they like, and all of that to kind of take that and make stories to benefit them.
Exactly. That's from the like a teacher point of view. Then from the point of view, we can teach some content and then give our students the opportunity to create their own story. So in that way, we are working and improving those 21st century skills, future-ready skills that we were talking about before. Like we teach content and we tell them, all right, now it is your turn to create a digital storytelling activity. So they are working on collaboration if they work on groups, communication, creativity, problem-solving skills. So I think that's
decision-making skills, which are really important, self-management, those skills that are really important for them to succeed in their future.
So I think like sometimes instead of just we as a teachers, just have all of the power and create all of the storytelling in our classes, we need to lose that power and give power to the students and empower those students for them to create different stories, and for them to kind of just drive their own learning, decide what they're going to do and how they want to learn.
A student-centered approach. They need to be the center of the learning. They need to drive their own learning, and by doing these storytelling activities is a great example.
I really love that. Yeah, I love seeing your passion and like the way that you're kind of treating each student as an individual. I think that it may take a little bit longer to perhaps get your teaching done. But I think in the end, it's way more effective than treating all students as though they're the same. And that individualized learning, like you mentioned, it can be the difference between a student being really engaged or a student, not being very engaged. I know that with Wakelet in particular, like I said, there's so many different ways that that teachers are using it in their classrooms. They found that even though, like you said, I don't think that there is one edtech platform that can compete with video games, right? In terms of stimulating like the level of engagement, eyes glued to the screen. But what we do is we enable those students to create those stories, like you just said, because I think that nothing beats a good story. It doesn't matter if it's being told to you by a person. It doesn't matter if you're hearing it through an audiobook or reading it. Nothing beats a good story. Really, really powerful. So you've basically covered how you use storytelling in your classroom, I guess. Is there anything else? Are there any other ways that you particularly use storytelling in your classroom other than what you just mentioned?
Yes, for example, when we do some gamification in our classroom, storytelling is so important in gamification. Actually, it is everything, right? Because if you video game, some quest, any adventure, the story behind the adventure is what is going to motivate the students. The students are going to be motivated by that story. If the story is not engaging, they are not going to care, right? Because it's like, I don't care. Like this is not like giving me what they want. So I think that if we think about gamification, storytelling is maybe like 90% of it.
Of the gamification. Gamification, when we talk about gamification, we talk about a series of activities, like a path they need to follow to be able to get to a point where they get a reward.
Yeah, right? And they complete tasks in that journey to be able to kind of accomplish the final goal.
Yeah, or defeat the final boss, or however you want to call it, right? So there has to be a story behind that, a story that connects every single activity, that it's meaningful for them or it's engaging for them and for us as a teacher. So use storytelling in gamification as well. It's very, very important, and we use it in that way. It's as Alberto said, you can have great activities, the best activities in the world. You can have the best gamification project in the world, but if you don't have a good storytelling backing that up, you will succeed.
Because on the other hand, you have a really good story and your activities are not that great, your students will love it just because of the story. So here's a great example of the power that stories have in our students.
Oh, that's really, really great to hear. So I'm sure that there are lots of people who are joining us today who are looking to bring storytelling into their own classroom. So let's say that a teacher who's watching this right now, they want to bring elements of storytelling into their classroom, but they've never done it before, right? It can be a little bit of a challenge because they'll think, okay, how do I incorporate this into my classroom? Do I need tools? Do I need training? What do I need to do? What kind of tips would you guys give to a teacher who's watching this now and is thinking, do you know what the E-Twins are saying is great, but I feel like I'm going to struggle a little bit because maybe I won't be able to engage my students, What kinds of tips would you give to teachers who are in that situation?
I think that, like as everything, start small.
Yeah.
Don't try to do the very first time you do it a year one project of storytelling, because it's not gonna happen, right? So I think start small, and then one really important thing is find out what your students like. If you like, you are going to be able to engage them. So that's really important. Find out what they like. Let's say they like Pokemon, right? All of them they do. So, if they like that, just create a story, and you can add content. And the main character of the story can be a Pokemon, like can be Pikachu, for example. So that's a great example, right? So just find out what they like and start small stories based on your students' lives.
So what I would start is maybe with just one activity, pick one activity that you normally do or you've done last year and you want to do it again this year, right? And include storytelling in that activity. Let's say you're going to teach science, for example. right? So get that activity and come up with a story that, is going to drive your activity. Like pick a character, even create one character if you don't want to pick like a Pokemon or
even the teacher can be the main character.
For
Students
example.
love that to kind of see the teacher going through all of these adventures. So that can be a good thing too.
Yeah, so just pick an activity, like just create a story that is of course it's gonna be an activity, and then
Random story.
yeah, kind of related, and then just like change that and start telling that story to your students and see how they react. If they like it, just keep going. Next time you pick 2 activities and you just don't do one story, you make it longer, and you include those 2 activities into the story. If you like it and you feel comfy about it, just keep getting, add some gamification, add rewards, like add like a final boss that they have to defeat. But as Alberto said, just start small. Just don't go to the like a 1 week project or 1 year project or 1 year gamification project the first time, because it's going to be hard if you do that.
It's going to be hard, and it's going to be frustrating for the teacher and for the students. And also something that we always say, like, just learn from your mistakes. Sometimes we as teachers, we ask students to do some things that we don't do, right? So we ask them to fail and learn. From the teacher point of view, sometimes we don't do that because we are so afraid of failing. So it's okay, you are going to fail because it's the first time you're going to try, but just fail, learn from that failing, and then like keep going.
Yeah, don't stop there, because if you stop when you fail, you're not gonna learn. You're not gonna do it perfectly, right? So if you fail the first time, that it happened to us.
A lot of times.
We've failed so many times. So instead of just stopping there, we learn from those mistakes and just keep growing and keep working on that.
Amazing. So it's find something familiar that the students are familiar with, that they think is cool, and then find the activity, start small, and then tell the story and kind of build from there. Yeah. I think that would be really useful. Yeah, that'll be really useful for educators to hear. Now, as time goes on, classes and classrooms and the world really is becoming more interconnected and more multicultural. Lots of different nations, lots of different races and cultures can be present in one classroom at any given time. So it's kind of known that storytelling can help kind of bridge those gaps a little bit, help bridge those cultural gaps. What are the benefits, I guess, in your experience, or just anything that what are the benefits of storytelling related to like multicultural classroom environments and, intercultural understanding, that type of thing?
This is a great question.
Yeah.
Because as you know, we teach Spanish too. So we always say that you can't fully understand. I mean, you can fully learn a language if you don't understand the culture behind the language. There is no way you can learn a language if you don't understand the culture. So storytelling is really important for that, for the empathy part of the learning. Those soft skills like empathy, and those skills can be developed by using storytelling really, really easy. Maybe learn about the story, something that is going on the other part of the planet or the other part of the globe, and you can learn about it just by listening to that story. It's what Mario was telling before. It is the oldest way of teaching, right? Before we didn't know, they didn't use computers and everything. What they did is just learning about something just by listening at one story. So I think that it is very, very powerful.
Right? And what Alberto was talking about, the empathy, like there are several researches that they show that empathy is going to be key in the future, right? We are very worried about machines, new technology. Are they going to replace us? Like something that they will never be able to replace. That's what we think, that they will never be able to have is empathy. Like understand how the other person is.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, self-awareness. They understand how the other person feels. And with the storytelling, we can have that. And what we have found is that it's very powerful for the students that we tell them a story about another student that is struggling on the other side of the globe. That student can't go to the school because he needs to go to get water for his family, for example, and the same age than our students. That shocks them because it's like it's a kid, it's a child that could be with them in their own class,
and he or she's struggling due to these problems. So storytelling is really important to bring that empathy key to the class, to kind of like show students that there are more realities than their reality. And that's really hard sometimes because they live in this kind of bubble and they think that the reality is the only one that exists in the world, and that's not the truth.
And even in the same classroom, as you said, like that could be different students with different background or like cultural background. And it's very important that we haven't done that, but we know some teachers who have, and they've got great results. What they do is they create a story, about the culture of one of his or her students, right? So the story is based on, like, let's say that there's this girl from Kenya, right? So the story is, even you're putting content inside of the story, because we can't forget that we need to teach. It's not just a story. The content needs to be inside, right? So the story is based on Kenya, about the culture in Kenya. And that story, at the same time that you are teaching content, is helping the other students to understand, like, how's the culture of this little girl that it is in their class.
And also, like, maybe like one activity that can help a lot in this, maybe a cultural storytelling night, where kind of different students with different backgrounds share their story to the class, to the school. That can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, I think that's incredible to hear. I mean, I think also it's important to tell the stories that can take students out of that bubble, out of that comfort zone, and show them that, like you said, a different reality exists for other children and other people around the world, but also for certain, students in the class who may be in minorities, seeing themselves reflected in stories that you tell and seeing themselves as heroes, I think, is really important as well. Being able to tell stories in which somebody who is, from the same area or from the same culture as them, I think making that person the hero, I think seeing themselves represented is really powerful. So again, stories have the power of doing that. And I love what you mentioned before about artificial intelligence and AI and that type of thing. And I love that you're wearing our Wakelet t-shirts, The Humans Are Coming, because that's really integral. Yeah, that's integral to our company, because we believe exactly that, right? We think that, algorithms and AI, they do amazing things that we could never do. But when it comes to telling stories and empathy, that type of thing, human beings are the best at it, the absolute best. So I love that. I love that you said that. And plus, in the audience, if anybody wants a Wakelet t-shirt, please hit us up on Twitter. We'll see what we can do. So have you used storytelling? I know that you mentioned just a little bit earlier, you said that when you were talking about maths and science, even though these topics might not really might not lend themselves very well to storytelling, but as a student who really, really struggled with maths, I would have loved to have seen equations and problems presented as a story and presented as me as the hero trying to kind of, like you said, reach that last level, Have you used storytelling to kind of address those more complex or abstract concepts in things like maths and science?
Well, I think that it is the same idea that we were talking about before. So the idea is like kind of, you can create a story where the students can face different problems or situations, and those situations can be, I don't know, math facts, or can be like multiplication or division. All those things can be included in the story, or even like that task can be the final boss. And during the story, they can learn the content, right? Or the steps of a division, because those are really hard sometimes to learn the steps of a division, right? So it can be like the story can be based on learning the different steps of division. And then at the end, the final boss can be, for example, or the final task or whatever can be, I don't know, like maybe like division to apply what they learned in that journey.
Another thing like we really like to do is like as a review before the test, we give to them the opportunity to create a story, right? All right. So like you learned all of this about division or fractions. All right. Okay. So now put it in a story. Okay. Because like we think that when we tell the story is great, but it's our story, we have limited that. So this is the story, this is what is going to happen. But what about if we give the power to our students? Like, okay, you learned all of this content. Okay, now create a story with this.
And also, even like you can do half of the story and they can finish the story. Okay, this is the story, but I'm not gonna tell you more about it. I'm gonna stop here, and now it is your turn, right? Like now you need to finish this story. You need to finish and tell me how you do like multiplications, right? So that those things can be really powerful in a math class.
Amazing, guys! Thank you so much for all of that information. Like I've learned a lot from you. I love the way that I love the way that you see things. I love the way that you conceptualize things, and most of all, I love how passionate you guys are. I mean, you've covered so much. Brenna, are there any? I know that the audience has been asking some questions as well. Are there any particular questions from the audience that you think that we'd be able to answer, Brenna?
Yeah, so quite a few people have been asking for.
I think you may be on mute. Oh, there we go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so quite a few people have been asking for some concrete examples. So you mentioned at the beginning the challenging student that you had, and you incorporated the Star Wars character. Maybe could you guys give another example of a way that you were able to incorporate storytelling to really reach and engage your students?
Yeah. For example, I teach history, but I don't know how to say this because
in a polite way.
Yeah, I don't like testing my students on history. Okay, because I think like history is way more than something written in a paper, right? It's like they're gonna take the test on a paper, but history covers way more. Covers culture, covers like art, so many things. So the way that I test history sometimes is just telling my students create a history story or an Egypt story or like a Mesopotamia story, including everything you've learned.
It is like,
okay, but of course I give to them the rubric. Okay, your story needs to have all of these things, right? All of this content. So the way that I do it is like they write the story or they write it or even like they film it. It's a storytelling as well. They create their script, they can film it, they can do whatever they want. Genially, Wakelet, whatever they want to use. And after that, I get their stories and I grade that because I have my rubric. I see like if they know the content, I see if they know like the culture behind the civilization that we just studied. I can see all of that from their story.
And that's really important because sometimes when we teach history, we teach battles, wars, we teach monuments, but sometimes we miss the daily routine, the daily life piece of the history. How these people like live like 100 years ago or like 1,000 years ago, what happened, how their daily life looked like. So with this, if we add this like a storytelling piece to it, and we can tell them, okay, now it's your turn. You are going to tell me this story, right? Mm-hmm. And based on the daily life of a child that lived in that age.
And they need to include everything they learned. It's like a test, but in a fun way. Right?
And they love to do that.
They love to do that. They are more engaged. I mean, like they stay in for recess. Like I couldn't believe it. But they just love it because they are so passionate about that because they are creating their own story. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just telling them you need to cover all of this. You need to cover all of this content. And they just creativity just flies.
Sometimes they choose to do this kind of storytelling, this story. And the main character is a girl and they are a boy, but sometimes they choose to put themselves in the story, at that age. So that's even more powerful because they are kind of living the history by just like telling the story.
I think it's a really good way as well, just very quickly, I think it's a really good way for them to learn those empathy skills, by putting themselves into somebody else's position. I know I saw one of the comments in the text box was somebody saying that even though they've tried, they find it quite difficult to get their students to find that empathy, and understand the importance of it as a skill. And I think that what you guys just said then is really powerful. Being able to give them an assignment or tell a story which puts them in somebody else's skin. Tell this story from the perspective of, a refugee, or from the perspective of somebody who went through the Holocaust, or somebody from a different culture completely, or even something just, less intense, just to get them out of their own shoes and make them think about how somebody else may have perceived those events, for sure.
Great. And maybe kind of continuing on related to what you were saying, in your experience, do you think that incorporating storytelling works for all types of learners? And kind of going off of that, how do you find the balance between more visual storytelling and spoken?
That's a hard balance to find, to be honest.
It is, but it is based on our students' needs. We truly believe that everything that it is done in the classroom should be based on what our students need, or how our students learn the best. So what we do is we just take our time to get to know our students and to get to know how they learn the best. And maybe instead of just doing one story, we do the same story, maybe written, and then a video or a Wakelet collection or something like that. It is based on their needs. That's really important. And I think that it is how we choose what we do. And we can do the same story in 3-4 different ways for our students to choose which one they like the best.
Or even for example, let's say an example with Genially, right? You're creating your story and you have your slide, and then maybe, I don't know, a story they get to a village or to a city, right? So you can put those interactive icons, buttons, and with different things, like a video or a sound, like an article, the written story. So you can have in the same story, those interactive buttons, with different options for them to choose, or even if they want to do all of them, you could do it,
Yeah. The point is we look alike, right? But we are so different. And even us, we learn differently. And so if we learn differently, that means everyone does, right? So we need to keep that in mind when we design stories for our students.
Okay, great. So yeah, really important to be flexible and to really understand your students then. Thanks. So another question that was in the chat is, based on your experience, what are those elements which make a story a great one? And what is maybe a basic structure that educators can follow?
Oh, that's hard.
That's a hard question. But
I would say characters they are very important. Depending on we need to think that stories are great, but we are teaching content, right? So sometimes if we make those characters very complex, we give them a very long story behind it, our students lose the perspective of that we are teaching a content, right? So I would recommend to have the characters, they need to have a story behind them and all of that. But as I said, if you make them very complex, our students are more focused on the story than on the content, which is great. And it's very engaging. But the final goal of this is teaching, right? Teaching a content. So I would say make great characters, but kind of keep them kind of simple,
easy to follow, easy to understand,
easy to follow. As well, the characters need to have, our students need to like them. So they need to feel kind of it's themselves in the story, kind of that.
I'm gonna give an example. So I did a story it was last year, spring, I think it was May, and the character he played Fortnite, right? Because it's what my students did 24/7. So I did, okay, why not? I can add this piece of information that there is not a lot for them to like the character, because they see them in that character. Okay, he plays Fortnite, I play Fortnite, so that they can relate to the character. And also one important thing is passion. When you are telling the story, it's really important. We can read the same story in so many different ways. And I can read the story, and he can read the story, and if he reads the story better, the students are going to be more engaged. So also practicing those communication skills as a teacher, it's really important.
Yeah, I think also having for me, what stories engage me tend to be ones that have a hero or a heroine, and that hero or heroine have to overcome something, like there's something in the way that they have to overcome. And I can just see how that can be applied to teaching through, maths problems, science issues, history, whatever it is. So yeah, I think having a hero that, like you said, is relatable, that you can kind of look to either as that's a reflection of myself or that's somebody who I'd like to become, and then having something that they can overcome, because we're all going through, we all have issues. I'm sure students as well, they may not say, but they all have things that they're trying to overcome in their lives. So yeah, again, maybe that's just back to the end.
Yeah, great. So there was one other comment in the chat that kind of jumped out at me that I wanted to share with you guys. And that was, I'm assuming this person is an educator. It says, I wish my students were so empathetic. I've tried that approach and they've told me that they don't care about those children and that they want stories about things that are actually important. Have you encountered that? Do you have any tips?
That's sad, but that's like, instead of just seeing that as a bad thing, like we need to think that it's a great opportunity to educate those students, right? We base our teaching in the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, a lot. So there are, like, I think that's a good starting point for those students, like to work on those goals and to include some of those goals in our stories,
And also I think it's important to understand that empathy is not a one-day thing. To build empathy in our students needs to be a long term. So we can't expect our students to get or to develop empathy the very first day or the first month we are working on that. We need to expect our students to develop empathy a long term. So for example, like let's say we've been working on this for 3-4 months, 5 months, and we don't see any improvement. It can be a normal thing, right? Maybe like it needs to be part of the school culture as well.
I really think so. I was going to say that. I think like empathy is very hard to develop because there are different factors that affect empathy. It's like where you come from, your school, your house, how your parents think about that. Like how you were educated. So that's why Alberto said that empathy is not a one day thing. Like it's like more like it's gonna be a long-term thing. All right. So if the first time didn't work, just keep trying and
don't give up. Don't give up.
Yeah. Keep including empathy and other like social emotional learning, social emotional skills in your teaching. And I really think that you will see an improvement after several months or even a year, or even you don't see an improvement on that year, but then a couple of years later, the teacher that has them, like she just comes to you and say, hey, I love it because my students are developing some empathy, and all of that. So it's not,
and that's thanks to you.
And that's thanks to you. So don't give up, because the first time didn't work. Just keep trying and keep including empathy and social emotional skills on your teaching, because that's what we truly think that makes a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Don't give up, and you never know what is really going to stick in the heads of your students, and that will be reflected later in life.
Are there any more questions at all, Brenna, or is that it, do you think?
Yeah, maybe we could just one more, this last question that just came in. What are maybe some best practices to help in good storytelling? We can close it out with that one.
Okay, I think that we've been talking about this during a whole webinar, but just to try to sum up all of them, right? Like start small, then like find what your students like, create good but basic characters, and don't do a lot of shiny things. What I mean is like the important thing is the content. The story is good, but the story needs to be focused on the content.
That's very, very important.
That's very important. If you kind of create this big story and then the content is so small, it's not meaningful. It can be meaningful, but you are not targeting the important thing here. And the important thing here is the content.
And try to work on more things than just the content. I mean, like we really value skills. like 21st century skills, future-ready skills,
soft skills.
soft skills. All of those skills are very, very important. And like as we say, like there are several researches that they are showing that skills will be even more important in the future than the content and the knowledge. You know, so every time you create a story, every time you are kind of engaging students in that stories, just keep in mind that you need to work on the skills at the same time that the content. So but this is how we understand teaching. You know, every activity you do, every lesson you teach
should have
a skill goal. You know, what kind of skill are you targeting? What are you going to do? Like, and the content goal. So both should be included in the storytelling activities.
Awesome. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. It's been amazing just for myself, even to hear you guys talk about the power of digital storytelling and how you can bring it into your classrooms. I've learned a lot for sure. So yeah, we look forward to seeing everybody for the next webinar, and hopefully this won't be the last one that comes from Wakelet and Genially as well. But I'm really looking forward to tuning into the other webinars as well and seeing all the amazing tips that are given from our educators. But thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you so much, Mario and Alberto. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat. Thank you to Genially as well for giving Wakelet the opportunity to host this. We thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
You, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.